Hey everybody, Merry Christmas. I hope this video finds you well. Here in Ontario, Canada, it is about a little over a week till Christmas time. And it's Sunday afternoon, and I had some things descend upon my mind, and I thought I would share them with you all today. So I hope you enjoyed today's thoughts. So if you refer to my last video, which was the Prodigal Christmas, and I'll put a link in the description, we had some discussions about how the story of the prodigal son can relate to, we can all see different aspects of ourselves and how we're interacting with people. Maybe some of the regrets we have, maybe some of the blessings we feel we have because of how we've come through circumstances. But today I was really thinking a lot about the age-old story of Charles Dickens' Scrooge. And so, and the voyage of Scrooge with the different ghosts, his review of his life and things like that. And I wanted to talk today with you folks about that, just as a reflective exercise as we pull towards Christmas and, even into the new year. So let's do that. So Scrooge, the age-old story of, self-transformation from someone who had seemed to be such a huge paradigm shift in his life from the beginning of the story to the end, and just through reflection and something that you yourselves may be able to see the value of in yourselves, people around you, or just even circumstances, maybe a little bit, maybe more extreme, but we'll try and break that down. So the story of Scrooge opens with, Ebenezer Scrooge. He's an older man. He runs a company, he loans money. And generally bankers are not considered to be everybody's favorite people from the standpoint of going as far back as Shylock and the Merchant of Venice to, the demonization of bankers now. Just generally not looked upon in the nicest light because they can be very extreme. And when we open on that story, he's, his quintessential line is "Bah humbug," meaning that, when we want to consider niceties, some people say niceties to him, and he's like, "Bah humbug." And he's more or less a man who has been consumed by a singular focus, and that singular focus is just getting money and getting more money, even to the point that he actually has achieved the goal of getting the more money, but he even rips off himself in regard to pampering himself. He's gathered the money for no other reason than just gathering the money. So we open on the story and we have Bob Cratchit working in the office, and Bob is a good employee, highly codependent because he needs the job, and he's working late hours and he's keeping his hands warm by a candle. Scrooge can't even splurge for a regular fire to heat the office. And Bob's in some distress. And Bob petitions Ebenezer for an extra bonus. And, through circumstances, that's denied. And Bob's not happy about that, but really, he has no choice. And so the day ends and Ebenezer goes home. Now, when Ebenezer as a figure, he's walking along, he's a tall man, but he sort of has a surly disposition, and when he arrives home, he actually has a large opulent home. If we refer to a visual of the original Aleister Crowley movie in the 30s, it's a large home with lots of appointments, but it's cold. He doesn't even give himself the luxury of having all the fires lit and a decent meal waiting for him. He comes in the house, he's freezing. His housekeeper gives him a very basic meal, and then he dismisses her. And he's by himself on Christmas Eve, cold, in his large house, with no one there. But he actually doesn't see that as a problem. He sees it's just fine because he's been living in his dysfunction for so long, he doesn't actually see how dysfunctional it is. So he goes to bed. In comical fashion, again, the old thing, his nightcap and nightgown, and climbs into bed, doesn't even light a fire in his bedroom. He just goes to bed. Now, in the middle of the night, he starts hearing something, and it's the sound of chains. And if you know the story, his old business partner appears in a scary state, Jacob Marley. And Jacob Marley is quite clearly a ghost, an apparition, but he is being weighed down by these immense chains. And he's dragging them around and he can barely move. And of course, Scrooge is terrified, and he goes to say to he recognizes his ex-partner. He says, Jacob, is that you? And he's like, yeah, Scrooge, you see these chains I'm carrying around? This is what the payoff of my wrong life has created. And now I get to spend eternity carrying these chains. And lucky for you, through whatever circumstances, I've been allowed to come and warn you that this doesn't have to happen to you. And so Scrooge is like, he's sort of taken aback, and he's wondering what's going on. And Jacob more or less says, hey, there's going to be 3 spirits that are going to come to you tonight, and they're going to show you your past, your present, and your future. So you will have a real opportunity to see how you can see if you've made the right choices. And so Jacob leaves, and it's a funny little happenstance, but Scrooge sort of attributes it to a bad dream, maybe having some bad food, whatever. He sort of dismisses it with a bah humbug, true to his character form, and he goes to bed. So the night progresses, and again, through an interesting circumstances, some noise, some sound effects, etc., the ghost of Christmas past appears. And he's quite taken aback, but through circumstances, the ghost of Christmas past takes Mr. Scrooge to a time when he was a young man. He's a young man, and he's going to a party. There's lots of people. There's friends who interact with him. There's even a girl who clearly is fond of him and has some attraction for him. And in the midst of all that, as Scrooge, the older man, is watching this, he's so grateful to see these people, see the visions of these people from the past, because he remembers how good their associations were, even to the point that he tries to call out to them. But the ghost says, no, these are apparitions. They're just echoes of the past. They're not real. They can't hear you. But in those apparitions and echoes, we see 2 things happen. A, the group wants to have fun, and Scrooge is like, no, I have to work. And then later there's a girl who comes and she confesses her feelings to him, and more or less he says, no, I've got to work on my business. I have no time for love. And you can see the grief in the character as he's observing himself in the past, more or less saying to himself, what a fool I have been. What a fool I have been to have had such a gift of these people and the love of this woman, and I threw it all away. And so Scrooge is then transported back to his apartment, or his house, and that ghost of Christmas past leaves, and Scrooge becomes a little bit reflective. He's still a little bit bah humbug, because he's thinking, it's like the analogy of the grapes you can't reach. The fox keeps trying to reach the grapes, and eventually he can't reach them. And so he just says, oh, those grapes must be sour anyway. It's an age-old tale. You may have heard of it. So Scrooge resigns himself that, those friends weren't worth it anyway, and that girl would have just been trouble. But he fails to recognize that the God that he embraced, we all have a God that we will pursue. But the God that he chose to embrace, which was money and business success, sacrificed the things that really mattered when he got to this middle stage of his life. And he still fails to really see that. So then the ghost of Christmas present comes. And you see, Scrooge is in a situation now in his life where he only sees what's in front of him. He sees his business, he sees the money, but he doesn't see the collateral effect all of his actions have on the world around him. So the ghost of Christmas present, brings him to his office and shows him interacting with Bob, and how Bob is very cold, and how Bob would love it if he could get a bonus for things he needs to do at home. And he doesn't get that bonus, but still, Bob then leaves the office, and you see Scrooge is really completely unaware of Bob's life because he just doesn't care. He doesn't care because he's so focused on himself and just the God that he is bowing to, which is money and his own interests. But we see Bob go home, and when he gets home, his home is actually very well lit. His wife is very pleasant. The children love him, and he's quite a family man. And we see that despite that Bob is in the adversity of his relationship with Scrooge, he still has a very full life. But the part that begins to affect Scrooge is that when Bob gets home and has this interaction with his family, there is Tiny Tim. And Tiny Tim has a problem with his legs. We don't know what his particular malady is, but Bob's wife talks to him and says, "Did Scrooge give you the bonus? Could we get Tiny Tim the help he needs?" And that's not the case. But Bob says, "You know what? We'll just make the best of it, and we'll move forward." But in that moment, Scrooge has an opportunity to see, we see children especially. We see children and we go, oh, how our actions could affect these children and make things so much better. And so in that moment, Scrooge again sees his relationship with Bob. And up to that point, his relationship with Bob has almost been one of a codependent, abusive dance. And what I mean by that is that, since Jacob Marley has died, his business partner, Bob's his only employee. He pays him just enough to keep him loyal, but he doesn't give him enough to really rise above and be prosperous. And make no mistake, if you look at his house earlier in the story, he very much so could. But he's focused on the money, he's focused on his life, and he has that one person in his life who he can just subtly abuse. And because Bob has no other choice, he will stay there. You have to forgive my grandfather clock in the background. It's 1:30. So Scrooge is then transported back to his apartment. And it's beginning to sink in. It's beginning to sink in the gravity of the choices he's made. He now looks back on the friends and the girl he had in his life when he was a young man, and he looks at his stark, empty house. He looks at Bob, who is, even despite the fact, Scrooge knows that he abuses Bob. But now he actually sees that despite how he abuses him, Bob still is able to move forward in a spirit of loving kindness with his family, because he has not internalized that abuse. He's basically enduring the abuse for the sake of his family. And so Scrooge is very reflective. He's just not sure what to do about it all. And at this point now, Scrooge knows that the final ghost is coming, the ghost of Christmas future. And so through circumstances that are quite hilarious, a little bit scary, kind of funny for theatrical effect, the ghost of Christmas future comes. And the first thing we do is we visit Bob at his house. And he's still there. He's still a happy family man. He's still busy doing his thing. But Tiny Tim's crutches are in the corner. Tiny Tim has not lived because he didn't get the treatment. We see a snapshot of the girl that Scrooge knew, and she has a nice family, large family, large life, and the friends, they're all having an opulent time, and it's wonderful. But we see Scrooge's business closed, and we also ultimately are visited at Scrooge's grave. His grave, which is in a stark cemetery. No one's around. There's no flowers. It is just, he's lived his whole life chasing money, chasing one goal, abusing those around him, because throughout the story as well, you see examples of how he abuses people, even when they wish him Merry Christmas. He abuses them. He abuses charity. He has an opportunity to be nice to some of his customers. He chooses not to. And at the end, he's basically left with nothing. Nothing. The God that he was worshiping has left him with nothing. And so, as you now sit back and, of course, Dickens' idea with the telling of the Christmas Carol was to, to really cause people to think, because even when he wrote it a couple hundred years ago, people were suffering or were dealing with the same circumstances they are now. And so maybe you can sit back and say to yourself, you may not be as extreme a person as Scrooge is. You may have pursued, perhaps let's pretend you have pursued opulence, but you've got a hierarchy. You really pursued opulence and money, and family's still there, but it's quite distant. Or maybe you've pursued, maybe you've got to this point where you've pursued a vice. Maybe you drank your whole life, or maybe you have, been just lazy, because these are vices as well. Maybe you just pursued something which has cost you the quality of your relationships. Maybe you now are in a situation where your life is empty. You have one person in your life. You have one person in your life that they won't leave, but through your actions, there's really not a lot of reason for them to stay. But they do, because they're codependent. And again, I'm not saying that's all of us. You might know someone who's like this. Because in the finality of that story, Scrooge realizes that a small adjustment is all he has to do to make a radical improvement. Because when he wakes up the following morning, where he finds out he died and nobody cared about him, he flings open the window, calls down to the boy, has the biggest turkey ordered. His nephew is having a banquet. He sends over the finest foods and gifts to that banquet. He shows up at Bob Cratchit's house. And although money can't solve every problem, he shows up at Bob Cratchit's house and just says, "Hey, I have been a complete idiot. I have abused you, and I'm going to make everything better." And he does. And it's amazing what a gesture like that can do for people. When you've been in an extreme state for so long, it's amazing how one gesture will make everyone immediately begin to transform. Not only people around you, because let's face it, there are those among us who have a great power to transform those around us. We have great power simply with a phone call, simply with showing up, simply with a promise, or simply with a possibility. And that's what Scrooge embraces. And of course, the story ends with everything being perfectly fine and perfectly wonderful. And so the choices you've made, sit back and say to yourself, okay, if I continue with these choices, what future do I have? In your past, you will have been given blessings. You will have been given not only blessings, but you will have been given the opportunity to see the blessings that were there that you may have turned your back on. That girl in Scrooge's life, his friends, even Bob, they were all blessings that were waiting to be opened in his life. And so my challenge to you this Christmas, friends, is that sit back and say to yourself, who in my life, what blessings could I turn up and give to the people in my life? How could I radically change everything for my family? If you've got a strange family and they made their case clear, and you have a role to play, what does the future look like if you don't play it? If you have people who care deeply for you, and you care deeply for them as well, and you actually, in your heart of hearts, you know that you should come together, instead of being stuck in fear, or, let's face it, in the case of Bob Cratchit, at any time, Scrooge could have created he could have made Bob partner. And I think actually at the end of Scrooge, he does make him partner in the role of Jacob Marley. But you could open it up and be so wonderful. And make no mistake, it's not in the Scrooge story. But if Scrooge could have gone back to that girl and said, if he had been able to speak through time and talk to himself and have him listen, he would have rewritten everything. He would have taken her. He would have cared for her in a way he never realized he could have done before. And both of their lives would be so radically transformed. It's a wonderful thing. So whether that's romantic or whether it's familial or even with your group or society, you could transform everything with just a small gesture. So no real pithy title for this video as far as the one thing you can do to radically change everything. But my encouragement for you as this Christmas season draws closer in this next week, but let's face it, we can make Christmas every day of the year. Analyze the paths you're taking. Analyze the people who are in your life, and also the ones who've been in your life. And really just say to yourself, back it up and say to yourself, have I always done my best and could I do better? Not to say you're right, not to say you're wrong. But ultimately look at the future and say, let's face it, I don't think Scrooge ever sat back and looked at the future and said, gee, when I get old, I want to be rich and have lots of money with a cold house, a bad attitude, and a broken employee. I don't believe that is anything he ever said he wanted. So when you look at your future and you look at where you are right now, I'm not even going to speculate how your life is and what it could be, but maybe say to yourself, in my future, do I want to have the most love possible? Do I want to have the greatest opportunity possible for me and the people closest to me? Do I want to feel safe and secure? Do I want to make other people feel safe and secure? Do I want to feel edified? Do I want to feel like I'm cherished and loved? Do I want to cherish and love? And if you can answer all these questions in the yes, fantastic. But if you can't, and you know the things that you could do today, tomorrow, next week to make all of those things come true, then I would encourage you to embrace the spirit of the Christmas Carol. Once again, Merry Christmas, folks. I love you all.